MCP, or Model Context Protocol, has surged in popularity over the recent months because it allows you to use your preferred AI tool to automate things on your behalf and control other tools that are part of your workflow. Now, this short video is to show you how to set up a local MCP server for Obsidian, which allows tools like Claude Desktop or even VScode Agent to connect your Obsidian vault and help you store some of your LLM conversations, search your vault, categorize and tag some of your nodes, restructure your existing nodes, or whatever other creative use case you might come up with. Now, this tutorial requires you to be comfortable using your terminal, and I'm demonstrating the setup on macOS, but you can replicate this in any other operating system with some variations. Let's get started. Before we dive into the setup, let me just briefly go over the Model Context Protocol, how it works, what are the different components, just so that you can get an idea of what are the things that we're installing and why do they need to be set up and configured the way they are. You are the user over here in this sequence diagram. You are using a host application that like VScode, Claude, or ChatGPT Desktop, whatever it is. In this application is going to be an MCP client baked in already that is configured, for the purposes of the MCP or the protocol. Now, on the other end, this client needs to connect to something called a server. And I'm going to explain the purpose of the server in a second. But behind the server, there's also the tool that you would like this host application to connect to. So the external service here in this case is your Obsidian, or it could be any other third-party service. Now, because this service here, external service, doesn't have a way to already tell the host application how they could integrate, we need this MCP server over here to expose some of the functionality from this external service, in this case Obsidian, in a way that the MCP client over here can connect to, so that they can exchange information, so that the host application over here can tell the external service what to do, which information to fetch, how to grab information, and so that the external service can also request some details and some information from the host application itself, which is sort of the front for the large language model. Without going too much into the detail, once you launch your application, the host application, and let's say you have Obsidian up and running, the MCP client is going to try to make a connection to the MCP server. Sometimes the host application itself runs an instance of the MCP server itself. The MCP server is configured, or should already be configured, to connect to your external service. And in the case that we're going to be configuring right now, the external service over here, which is Obsidian, is going to expose a REST API, local, nothing over the internet. The REST API is going to be used by another application called the MCP server to connect to the host application in this case. Now, what are we going to use? We're going to use two plugins, or one plugin and one other application, which is the MCP server for Obsidian. The first one is called Obsidian Local REST API. It's by Codington Bear. I created a fork of it because, this is my private vault. I definitely don't want to be exposed to supply chain attacks and problems like this. So I create a fork, I review it, I make sure there are no bad things in it, and I use my fork. And if I need to pull in changes, I can sync my fork after reviewing, the upstream code and make sure there are no problems with it. And I really think that you should take security into consideration. Keep it always in mind over here. This stuff makes your life easier, but you shouldn't exchange security for convenience. So this is the Obsidian Local REST API. It's a plugin that you can configure on your Obsidian. And what it's going to do is it's going to expose a REST API server that is going to be used by the second component, which is the MCP Obsidian server right here. Now, the MCP Obsidian server is a Python application which can be configured to connect to your Obsidian REST server. You can specify a host, and you can specify an API key over here. And then the MCP server is going to be sort of the translator for everything that comes in from your host application. So the flow of information is you prompt the LLM in the host application. The host application recognizes that it needs to call or fetch information from Obsidian. It will utilize the MCP client to connect to the MCP server, and then the call is going to be made to Obsidian to fetch information from it, or to store information in it, or to do some search or list files and whatnot. Now, the capability of the Obsidian REST server are limited to reading, creating, updating, deleting existing nodes. You can also list nodes stored in the vault, create and fetch periodic nodes, or execute some command and list what are the commands available in Obsidian. In our terminal, let's first navigate to the folder where we are storing our Obsidian vault. In this case, my folder is called Obsidian Vault and the vault name is BSD. This can be very different depending on your setup and your environment. Now in this vault, there needs to be a folder called .obsidian. And then these are my notes. These are the folders I have already and where my notes are. So if I run tree, you can see here my notes, the files that I have, so on and so forth. Now, I want to go inside the folder Obsidian. And then inside this folder, there needs to be another one called plugins. I need to go there. And you can see here that I already have a couple of files, which are the MCP server as well as the local REST API plugin. Now, because we want to install this as a community plugin, as a local plugin, we need to clone the code, fetch it, and store it in this folder right here inside our plugins directory. So how do we do that? Pretty simple. You just go to GitHub, click on code, grab this URL over here, go back to your terminal, and type in git clone, provide the URL, which is going to create a copy of the entire project here in your plugin folder. Now, because I've done that already, which is going to jump directly into the folder, Obsidian Local REST API. And then if we do a listing, you will notice that this is a TypeScript project. We have a package.json file. Normally, it would be a good idea to inspect this file. So I'm going to use bat in order to look into the content of it. You will see here we have a bunch of dev dependencies and we have a bunch of other dependencies. Now, obviously, when you clone this directory, all of the dependencies are not installed. So we need to run npm install. Once you do that, it's going to install all of the prerequisites and all of the packages necessary to run this particular project. And then if we inspect the package.json file one more time, you will see that you already have a build command over here. So you need to build this project in order for it to be effectively used by Obsidian. So run npm run build, press enter. This is going to compile the entire project. It's going to use the TypeScript compiler, and it's going to create a main.js file, which is about 2 megs of size. And that's what's going to be used by Obsidian to run the plugin. So now if I jump to my Obsidian setup, then I go to settings, Obsidian settings. I can go to community plugins over here. And then immediately you should be seeing the install plugin. If you don't see it, just restart Obsidian, but it should already be in this installed list over here. You can enable it. And you can also go to the settings where it's going to show you the URLs that the web server is running on, as well as the port and the API key that you're going to be using to configure your MCP server. And it will show you an example of how you can connect to the endpoints. Now, what I would recommend you do is you click on regenerate certificates. For safety purposes, just create fresh new certificates. We're going to need these certificates because you need to add them to your local trust store. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to connect to the server with HTTPS locally. You need to accept this self-signed certificate because this is not a certificate signed by a third party or a certificate authority that is well known. This is self-signed. So you need to accept or add the certificate authority to your store. Copy this URL, go back to your browser, open this in your browser over here. You should get a warning because this is a certificate that is not trusted. You would normally click over here. You could go to connection is not secure, check the certificate. You can go to details if you're using Chrome, export the certificate. This will allow you to download a local copy of that certificate. Once you have that, you can just click on it and accept it or add it to your trust store, which is what I have done over here. Let me show you how you can do it on Mac. Just double click on it, click on trust, and then specify always trust. That's it. Once you do that, the certificate is going to be accepted and your browser is not going to complain about it anymore. And that's it. If you can see this in your browser, then that means the server is up and running and we are ready to move on to the next step. This next piece is a little bit easier because there isn't much to do there. We are going to go to the Marcus P. Funstein. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, but we're going to go to the MCP Obsidian implementation. And again, I'm forking it for security purposes. or safety purposes, and this is the MCP server. So if in this diagram, we just configure the external service in our case by enabling the REST API exposure, and now we want to configure the MCP server. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to click on code, and again, copy this URL, go back to my terminal, and now I'm going to go back one step. I'm going to store the MCP Obsidian server inside my plugins directory, but you don't need to do that. You can just put it anywhere else you want. This doesn't have to be, this is not an Obsidian plugin. It can be anywhere else you want, but I just want to, keep everything located until somebody figures out a solution to all of these MCP servers and have a management application for all of these different utilities. But for now, we're just going to put it here. So once you again run git clone and provide the URL, sorry, not this one. Let's go back here. Let's copy this and paste this URL. You're going to get a copy of the MCP server running locally for you. So I'm going to go now into this folder. And in this case, you will notice that this is not a TypeScript project. This is a Python project, in fact, because of the UV lock over here. So what we need to do is type in UV sync. And once you do that, it will install all of the dependencies, just like what we did with the NPM node modules. But in this case, Python uses something called virtual environments. And obviously you need to have Python installed on your machine in order to be able to run this. And you also need to have UV installed on your machine. And you can do that with brew install UV. It's pretty easy, or any other operating system, just look up UV and it's a pretty popular utility. The virtual environment is sort of a way to not pollute your global environment with a lot of dependencies and other packages, and can allow you to run and install the requirements for this particular project in this particular environment. And just whenever you want to trigger or run this application, it will utilize its local environment as opposed to the global one. And I think this is a pretty neat way to get things configured. So once we do that, you can actually run the MCP server yourself by running UV UV directory. And in this case, I'm providing the local directory with the pwd command, but you can also hard code the path for MCP Obsidian, and then you can type in run MCP Obsidian. And when you do this, when you run this, the server is going to run. But obviously we don't want it this way, because that is going to block this process is going to block your foreground, and you're going to need to keep it running in your terminal if you want everything to keep to connect properly and to keep working. But that's not what we want. We want the host application, which in this case is Claude or VScode agent or whatever else, to manage this process for us. So we're going to skip this step and we're going to jump to configuring our host application. But before we do that, there's one last step that we need to do over here, which is to create a .env file. And in this .env file, after we create it, we want to add a couple of variables to it. We're going to add the Obsidian API key over here, which you can grab from Obsidian. Just copy this. You can click on the copy button over here, paste it. And then the Obsidian host, which if you're running the things locally and you're not hosting this somewhere else, it's just going to be 127.0.0.1. And the MCP server is already configured to utilize the port 27124. So you don't have to add the port value yourself. Once that is done, now we have pretty much all of the components. So we have the MCP server configured and we have the external service configured. Now we need to configure our host application so that the MCP client can connect to the MCP server. Let's do that. For the host client application, I'm going to jump to Claude. In this case, I'm going to click on the Claude settings. I'm going to go to, let me grab this over here. I'm going to go to the developer tab and I'm going to click on edit config. You can see already I have configured the MCP Obsidian, but I'm going to show you how you can do that yourself. It's going to open the file system and it's going to prompt you to open this file in your editor. So I'm going to use Z in this case, and I'm going to open this file over here. And the configuration that you need to add is very simple. Just add the MCP server object over here. Underneath it, MCP Obsidian. You can call this whatever you want. The command needs to be UV. And then you need to specify the arguments that we're going to be using. Just like we ran the command in the terminal, you need to specify the same argument over here. The first argument is -- directory. The second one is the full path for where we stored the MCP Obsidian folder, which is in .obsidian/plugins. This cannot be a relative path. Then you need to type in run and then MCP Obsidian. And that's it. This is how you configure Claude to run this server on demand whenever Claude is initialized or is running. Once you do this, save the file, close it, go back to Claude, and you should see something like this. If you don't see it, restart Claude and it will start the MCP Obsidian server process on your behalf. And that's it. You've pretty much configured Claude now to be able to talk to Obsidian. So you can say, list all the nodes that I have in my Obsidian vault. And Claude should know that now it needs to talk to the MCP client and the MCP server that belongs to Obsidian. And every time you want to run a command on the external service, or Obsidian in this case, you need to allow the command to run. Make sure you understand very well what command is running. You make sure that it is not a destructive command. And if you don't want it to run, just click on deny. Now this can become a little bit repetitive. It's understandable. I think things will improve over time from a security standpoint, but you also don't want the LLM to run wild and destroy your nodes. So that's why you need to make sure that maybe with Obsidian, you are using Git to preserve your content, and so that you can have sort of a way to restore things if the LLM messes things up on your behalf. Remember, this is all very experimental technology and it's not super proven yet. And I've just had a couple of use cases where the LLM can go wild and it can potentially ruin certain things for you. So make sure you are safe and make sure you are running this in a very controlled manner. And as you can see here, Claude was able to extract all of the files that I have in my vault, and I showed you in my tree listing. It shows you the folders, it shows you whatever. So you can also say, create a new node under the tech content folder, and let's write a script for how to configure an MCP server, for example. And now Claude should be able to do all of the necessary research, and you can iterate with it on the content, and then it's just going to append this content to your Obsidian vault. It's going to do everything on your behalf. You don't need to do much. You can also tell Claude to pull a certain node and maybe even, tag it, add the appropriate tags, add the appropriate hashtags, whatever it is you want to apply on it, or maybe even summarize it, or maybe even extract some nodes from it, or create derivative nodes. You can be as creative as you want here. The only problem I have with this implementation is that I don't necessarily want to read the output in this way. I want actually to be able to iterate with the large language model on the content first, and then maybe I just want to store it in Obsidian. But here it's preventing me from doing this, and it's only giving me sort of this small limited view, which I don't necessarily appreciate. Maybe it would be cool if this is shown in the artifacts view over here, but whatever. Now that the work is done, I can just go to Obsidian. Let me close this. Go to tech content, and I think it created it over here. And as you can see, this is the outcome. Now, obviously, we did not really iterate on this. It's asking for Java and I don't know what other commands, weird configuration it wants, but yeah, you get the point. A lot of people don't know, but VScode has MCP capabilities right now, and you can configure your Obsidian server to also be accessible by the agent in VScode. Let me show you how that works. We're just gonna open the settings with command comma, or you just can go to code and then settings. And in here, just type in agent first of all. And when you do that, make sure that in chat, the agent mode is enabled. We're gonna need this. And the second part is type in MCP, and also make sure that you enable MCP server in chat. This is still in preview, so if you cannot see it from your regular VScode setup, make sure you install VScode Insiders. You obviously need to have a Copilot subscription in order to be able to run this. And then we need to go into settings.json, click on that. Once you do, you can come to this section over here and add, again, the same configuration we did. You can add MCP, open the brackets. Now you will see here, I have a configuration already for the GitHub MCP server. And if you didn't know about that, that exists. And you can just go and grab a copy of it. But that's not what we want to talk about. The MCP Obsidian configuration is exactly the same as the one we added to Claude. So just type in this segment over here, this object, pass in the proper arguments, use the command uv, make sure the type here is stdio, which we did not specify in Claude. Once you do this, save your configuration, and you can just immediately see that it's going to prompt you to start the server. You can click on that. Once you do, let's actually run it. Once you do, you can jump to the chat window over here. And in the chat window, make sure you switch the mode to agent. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to talk to it. So it has to be in agent mode. And the toolbox over here will specify that you are properly connected to the server. So if you click on it and scroll down a little bit, or actually there it is at the top, you will see here that the MCP Obsidian server is now configured and accessible for the tool. If you want to troubleshoot it, you can go to the output and it should show you what's happening with that server. So now if we say the same prompt, list all the nodes that I have in my Obsidian vault, and let me just remove this from the context. It should be able to do or to execute pretty much the same actions. It's also going to prompt you for permission. And then once you do that, you're going to click on trust. It's going to list all of the files and nodes just like Claude Desktop did, but now from VScode. So if you prefer to work with your Obsidian vault from VScode, if you maybe want to document some code, if you want to take some snippets from your coding project and store them in Obsidian, if you want to write some documentation, if you want to update your documentation based on what you have in the code, that's totally fine. And you could say also, like, why would I use Obsidian if I have VScode? That's also a valid question. Personally, I use VScode more for coding and Obsidian for other types of note taking, but we are where we are. It really depends. Everybody has their own preferences. And as you can see here, we have everything we need. Now, the cool thing about VScode, which is not possible in Claude, is that you could change the agent that you are using with your MCP server. So in this case, I can use Claude 3.7 Sonnet. I could use GPT 4.1. I can even use Gemini 2.5 Pro, which this model accessibility is not possible with either ChatGPT Desktop or Claude Desktop. This is definitely something. This is one of the use cases why I would prefer to configure my MCP server with VScode. That's it. That's all I wanted to show you. Have fun, enjoy, write as many awesome notes as you want, automate whatever you need to automate. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time.